And it's showing on the Zoom.
Yep, you're all set.
Okay, so I did my project on the effects of MEI on the transformation of the establishing operation between the manned and tacked cusp. So the purpose of my study is to try to induce the transformation of the motivating operation for the antecedent of a manned and a tacked for kids with autism or developmental delays through the use of multiple exemplar instruction. And I found this to be something socially significant to look into for our less verbal kiddos who have a lot of trouble communicating and might emit a lot of maladaptive behaviors in response to their inability to communicate. So they might be saying something and asking the person they're with for something, but they're actually tacting and they're not really manding, or they're actually manding and they're not really tacting, but getting the incorrect consequence from whoever they're working with. And just way back of like when mands and tacks were initially classified by Skinner. Mands, as we all know, it's controlled by deprivation and getting access to an item, and tacks are under the control of a nonverbal discriminative stimuli to gain access to recruit social attention from other people or generalized reinforcement. So you don't want an item because you're talking or saying something, you want to engage with the people around you. And if you learn a word as a mand, you don't necessarily get it as a tack. They're two separate independent behavioral classes. So if a child learned the word cookie, it wouldn't mean that if they saw a picture of a cookie, they would also say that out loud to tact it, and vice versa. If you tact a bear, you wouldn't mand for a toy bear unless you learned it separately through a lot of intensive instruction. And one of the studies that I thought was important to what I wanted to test was this one by Nizzolo, Gomez, and Greer. And they tested the use of MEI on untaught mands and tacks with adjective-object pairs. So it was with 4 students between the ages of 6 to 9 with autism or developmental disability, and they were able to use the word I want item name, or to tack, that's a, and then whatever the what they were seeing was. And the adjective pairs they used was a big, medium, or small bowl, or first, second, or last box with what they had to say for this study. And the results of this multiple exemplar instruction was used alternating mand and tack conditions. And they were able to learn mands and tacks after instruction with multiple antecedent conditions, and that MEI can be used to change their history of reinforcement to respond under various antecedent conditions. So it was successful in doing what I'm interested in looking at. And then I know we don't have a bunch of time, so I want to just kind of share this other study that's closely related to what I'm looking at. So they did 2 parts to this study where they also used MEI. The first part of the study, it was they would test if they had mands based off of teaching them tacks, or test if they had tacks based off of teaching them the man label. And then in their MEI procedure, it was an interrupted chain or incidental mand where certain items, like they would use like a whole crayon or a partial crayon and interrupt activity they were doing, and then prompt them to ask for the whole crayon. So it was an adjective paired with an item name, and then to interrupt them and to get them to mand for the item. And then when they could, throughout that, hold up something they knew the child didn't want, to get them to tact for it. So kind of rotating between mand and tacks to try to get them to learn both names under either antecedent. And just some issues they had with that is that they would satiate off the mand very quickly because they wouldn't always want the activity they were trying to prompt. So a change that they made in their second study was just putting specific items in containers and having them tack for the containers instead. And this study was successful in using MEI to get the participants to learn untaught adjective object functions for mands or tacks. And then the study I designed, I am looking for a minimum of 3 participants that can demonstrate a functional relationship when I implement the independent variable And then following like the similar age range of what I had read up, like in elementary school level, able to meet echoics and independent means and able to learn tax, has instructional control in the setting that I would take them from. Doesn't have the ability, doesn't have naming and repertoire, doesn't have observational learning and repertoire, and then may emit mans or tax under the incorrect conditions, and doesn't necessarily, doesn't have the ability to respond to interverbal in conversation. And the design that that is most practical for my setting, because I work in the ABA in-home service provider, would be a delayed, it's a delayed multiple probe design across participants. So we would start one participant at a time and not begin the second one until the first participant has met criterion and is working on their post probe. And then what I would actually test would be, so these are kind of examples of the stimuli or materials I would use. So picking 5 targets and then putting it on an item like a cup or a plate or a bowl, something that they don't have experience or exposure to. And then in pre-intervention, teaching them to tack the item to criteria, which we tend to do as 90 times 2 in 20 trials. And then showing them the items with a reinforcer placed in it and seeing if they'll ask for, like one of the characters was Jake. So they would say like, I want Jake cup to get the item out of the cup, even though they were only taught it to tack, that's the Jake cup. And then doing it vice versa with a different set of stimuli, teaching them to man for the cup to get an item we put in it. And then once they meet criteria for that, probing 20 trials, well, they tacked it since they learned to request for the cup specifically. And then I have it kind of set where pre-intervention, they'll use cups as the object and then just changing the labels. So intervention when MEI is run will be a plate, and then their post-intervention will be a bowl. And for my independent variable, it would be a rotation of manned and tack responses with one set of my material stimuli that I had shown. So the tacks would be shown in 2D form, and I would take a picture of the item with the stimuli on it and show it to them and have them tacked for it, but they won't receive any item as to consecrate that. And for a manned response, it would be putting a few of the cups out, putting one item in a cup and having them ask for it and then giving them access to it. So randomly just rotating between the manned and the tack to try to induce the skill. And then the dependent variable for this intervention would be back to that initial chart where we probe it with a new set, teaching the tact again and probing if mands emerge, and teaching the mand again and probing where if tacks would emerge with a different set of stimuli that they hadn't seen. And then the goal would be collecting IOA for all probe sessions and a minimum of 25% of like the MEI intervention for all my participants that would be in it. And I think that's it. I'll try to keep it nice and short.
No, that was perfect. That was absolutely perfect. And I'll go ahead and I'll jump in right away. I actually love this study and I love this procedure. And the effect of it is so clear. And I actually think that having these two presentations back to back show the kind of the scope of what research can do, right? The observational learning one gets big and bulky and complex conceptually and this and that. And this is just like cut and dry, straightforward. Here's what we think the problem is. Here is why we think the problem is. Here's how we think we fix it. And we test it. And boom, and it works. Like this is a great study for its simplicity. I really appreciated that you noted the the issue that they saw with students or participants satiating on particular stimuli in the man conditions and having to switch that to the receptacle that they were getting as the man, so they could switch that out. And that, like, it was so simple. It was like the brilliance was how simple that was, and that you could really have demonstrate control based on that small of a change. I think is really valuable in the research process. Have you done this before? Have you either clinically or for as an experiment?
So Crystal Lowe, who did the second experiment I went over, or the second study I went over, is kind of helping me manage getting this started. So we've kind of practiced with one kiddo trying to run it through, but we haven't officially like gone with 3 participants with a functional relationship. So we're like troubleshooting how to get this done right now.
Gotcha. So I think this is just a fantastic like learning study. If you want to be able to very systematically practice, like, okay, let's do our probes today and our intervention tomorrow, and then our probes, and then our intervention, then our probes, and intervention. Like this is just a great one to work on. And again, it's just straightforward. It really is. Were there anything? Is this a direct replication?
I think there are some things that we're adjusting that aren't going to be exactly the same as the initial one.
Do you recall what those changes are?
It might be more similar to like a very close replication to her second part of the study 2 rather than study 1. So I'm not attempting to do the interrupted chain procedure at all.
Gotcha.
I don't know off the top of my head how different it is from the second part.
Okay, so that's something I go talk to Crystal, hash through that a little bit. And what I would challenge you to do in your discussion is go back to the original studies and find the pieces that they were like, we could have done this different or should have done this different. And in your discussion, I want you to talk about how you might be able to incorporate that fix into your study. Or if there's anything that you are quote unquote solving from the original studies, then do the same. Okay?
Okay. All right.
Awesome. All right. Any other thoughts or questions? Like I said, I really like that study. I'm really glad that you're replicating it. You will learn so much about research, about verbal behavior, about MEI, about autoclitics, about like that. There's just so much in so much that's clean in such a small little study there. I think that's an awesome opportunity. Cool. All right. Was anyone else hoping to go tonight?
Yeah, I was, but I mean,
Okay.
I can.
Yeah, no, let's do it. How are you gonna blast through it, or you got time?
I can blast through it, sure.
No, I want you to make sure that you have time.
It's not that complex.
It's fine. People are gonna come on for 593 and they're gonna hear you as well, and then we'll jump off and get back on for 593. It'll all be good. All right, cool. Go ahead, Ashley.
Okay, let's see. I'm just gonna keep it like this because I don't really know how it works. I never actually click the present button.
Yep. That's fine.
In slides. So, okay, so my project was on teaching life skills with telehealth, and I actually became interested in this from initially doing telehealth with whenever COVID happened, and I was trying to find some articles on direct service delivery through telehealth. And I noticed that it was like most of the literature was on like caregiver implementation. So I did some research in that when we initially started this class. So my abstract, I'm gonna get to all this, so I'm just gonna skip that. So the literature review, so people with intellectual or developmental disabilities are an underserved population, and the need for service delivery to, hold on, this box is in the way, okay. And the need for service delivery to those with intellectual or developmental disabilities is expected to grow in the future. One limitation to service delivery is the provider shortage. And I just kind of like, there are so many studies that showed this, so I pretty much just outlined the main points of all these studies that I cited. Some of the other barriers to service delivery were related to time and money constraints. So this could be like people living in rural areas and the cost of travel to go to a clinic or for the provider to go to a home. Telehealth is a virtual service delivery platform that uses real-time video and audio to connect people in different locations using computer and internet. In various other fields, telehealth platforms have been used and proven to be effective for providing services to clients or patients. Telehealth has been used by professionals in consultations and providing doctor services and mental health counseling and other various service deliveries. So using telehealth platforms as a means of service delivery has the potential to be effective and decrease limitations of monetary and time constraints. So now starting to narrow it down a little more. Telehealth has been used primarily for caregiver trainings and assessments, including functional communication training. I saw a lot of that in the literature, and graduated guidance procedures and functional analysis. The research studies and applied behavior analysis testing the effectiveness of telehealth mostly include teaching caregivers to implement the procedures, which makes sense. And so the reviews of the literature revealed weaknesses in experimental design, poor measures of quality based on Reichel standards, and limited scope of research. So even more limited is the ABA and telehealth research that study the effects of using telehealth to deliver direct services to clients who are able to receive services and like attend to the screen and to the service provider without an intermediary caregiver. Pellegrino and DiGennaro Reed's study is one of the few studies on direct service delivery from a technician or BCBA to the client without a caregiver mediating. They were present, but they didn't actually, they weren't coached to deliver the services. So this study used least to most prompting and total task chaining to teach adults with intellectual or developmental disabilities directly through telehealth. And the participants were taught all 3 skills to mastery and maintain the skills at high levels at 2 weeks follow-up. So these skills that they taught were like, one of them was how to make like quesadillas, and one was how to make origami, so like leisure skills, and then like entertaining other skills. And I can't remember the others right now. So this brings us to the current study. So the replications of this research and comparing telehealth delivered services to in-person delivery can provide evidence of the effectiveness of telehealth as a service delivery model. Providing the most effective interventions possible to individuals receiving ABA services is a component of providing socially significant interventions while meeting the BACB's ethical guidelines for practice. The current study aims to extend the current research on delivering direct services through telehealth and its effectiveness by teaching high school students with disabilities life skills in both the home and virtual telehealth settings, using least to most prompting and total task chaining. So it was to compare the effectiveness of the 2 settings. So here's the method. 4 participants between the ages of 14 and 17 years old who attended a public high school were diagnosed with intellectual and developmental disabilities were in the study. Each participant was a recipient of ABA services, and all of the participants were screened to have the necessary prerequisite skills for attending to the screen. They had prerequisites to virtual telehealth sessions, including following vocal and written simple instructions, speaker and listener skills, observational learning through a model, and attending to a person through a computer screen. And the settings included the participants' homes and also an ABA clinic. So the materials needed for this included computers with good internet access, paper task analysis for the skills that were taught, online games and activities that were used at the end of the session as like reinforcers for completing and participating in the activities, and items necessary to complete the tasks. So like paper if it was to teach origami, a shoe if it was to teach tying shoes. For data collection, data was recorded on correct and incorrect responses by the trainer conducting the session. A plus sign was used to record a correct response and a minus was used to record an incorrect response. And the participants' progress were tracked through graphing the percent of correct steps completed for each task analysis. Some sessions were recorded for IOA and treatment integrity purposes, and data was collected in the same manner for that. So an alternating treatments design was used for the 4 skills taught for each participant. The 4 skills taught for each participant were randomly assigned a treatment, with 2 skills being taught virtually and 2 skills being taught in person. The sessions were randomly rotated, but no more than 2 sessions of the same skill could be taught in sequence. Sessions were conducted between 2 and 5 times a week for 1 hour to 3 hours. And I meant to cite, there's an article that I pulled this like specific design comparing the 2 settings from, and I meant to cite it in this, but I did not. I'll have to add that in. Okay, so baseline data was collected on the participants' abilities to perform each skill. Each task analysis consisted of 7 steps. Baseline data was collected in the predetermined setting each skill would be taught in. In the baseline condition, each participant was asked to complete all the steps of a skill. No prompting or help was given. Data was collected on the number of steps completed correctly and independently. And then that brings us to the intervention. The teaching phases consisted of a trainer present virtually or in person, depending on the phase. The participants were taught to complete the skills using least to most prompting. If the participant did not respond in 5 seconds or responded incorrectly to a step in the task analysis, the least intrusive prompt level was used for that step, and a minus was recorded because the step was not completed independently. If the step was still not completed correctly, the next level of intrusive prompt was used. Once the participants met criteria on a skill, which was scoring 86% in 2 consecutive sessions because of the number of steps used, or 100% correct in 1 session, the skills were tested for generalization in the setting in which they were not taught and with a different trainer. And then after testing for generalization, a probe was conducted to measure maintenance at a 2-week follow-up. And then I would have my results and all that. And that brings us to the discussion. The results of the study can indicate if telehealth delivery can be as effective, more effective, or ineffective when teaching skills using these tactics, often taught in person, to teenagers with intellectual or developmental disabilities. Limitations will include varying degrees of the skill difficulty being a confounding variable when comparing the effectiveness in the 2 service delivery settings. There were some studies that I looked at that taught like they didn't do different settings, but they just did different conditions or different treatments, but the similar task, like building with Legos, like 4 different configurations, which could still be interesting. So then the findings of this study will help to establish more support for alternative methods of service delivery when in-person delivery is unavailable, limited, or less convenient. And here are my references. And that's all.
Awesome. All right, so for those who are just getting on, we're still finishing up 501, but don't feel that you need to jump off by any stretch. Ashley, awesome job. I really like this for a number of reasons. The primary value that I see here is that we're taking something that is socially significant, practically, over there, okay, topically relevant, right? This is extremely important right now. And in a very systematic way, the kind of like 5 studies that you outlined, this is what I'm doing, and then we'll have to test for this, and this, are building a story using sound behavioral practices. Like that checks all the boxes. And that's so cool to see. What we spoke about back at the beginning of the semester, or one of the things that we spoke about, was you take known dependent variables and change the independent variable, or you take known independent variables and change the dependent variable. In this situation, you're taking known procedures, a known independent variable, and you're testing, is that effective on new dependent variables with that task through telehealth, right? And everything else kind of stays the same or is done in the analysis of the social significance or the importance of telehealth or whatever aspect you're deciding to look at. And I think that's a beautiful example of how applied research can be both practically relevant and experimentally sound. And that's a really, really great place to be. The challenge is obviously getting your multiple baselines and your controls and the experimental control aspect of it. But from a design perspective, I think that checks all the boxes really, really well. All right. Awesome. Okay. Anyone else for 501? I know we have like a hybrid class going on right now. All right. I can't remember if there's class at this time next week through Dr. G, but we are interviewing for some new assistant professor positions. And we are going to be having demo lessons next week. And I'll say this again and send an email. But we're going to be having a demo lesson next week, Monday at 5, Monday at 6, Tuesday at 5, and Tuesday at 6. And you guys are all both invited and encouraged. And I'm asking that you guys attend so that we have a nice audience for those demo lessons. Demo lessons are going to be about 30 minutes long with like 20 to 30 minutes of discussion in between to just get your guys' feedback. We're opening it up to a bunch of classes, but the more that we can get, the better off we are going to be. Okay, so look out for those emails and please, please, please plan on attending. All right, awesome. I am going to end the recording now. Stop recording.